pequeños insectos, básicamente mariquitas, catarinas. Y pues bueno, él nos va a platicar también parte de su trabajo que ha realizado en la reserva de Campinos, que es una reserva natural que está altamente antropizada y cómo han ido recuperando esta área. Es uno de los campos más grandes que está junto a Polonia. Y pues bueno, también los invitamos, el doctor Jerzy va a estar con nosotros ahora un rato después del seminario. Vamos a tener reuniones y vamos a tener espacios para que hablen con él en persona, pero vamos a también a tener una reunión con el posgrado en particular, porque el hecho de que el doctor esté acá y nosotros, ustedes saben, Norca, Alejandra, que son estudiantes de nuestro posgrado, estuvieron 6 meses en Polonia. Y bueno, yo también ya estuve en Polonia, Francisco también ya estuvo en Polonia, y Natalia va a Polonia próximamente en mayo. Este proyecto en esta versión termina con la visita de Natalia, pero pues bueno, estamos pensando en hacer un nuevo convenio, y pues bueno, la idea es ver en qué podemos colaborar con la Universidad Cardinal Stefan de Polonia y puedan ustedes unirse a este tipo de intercambios, que están patrocinados, por cierto, por Erasmus, ¿no? La Comunidad Europea. Y pues bueno, sin más, les dejo con el doctor Jerzy Romanowski. Jerzy, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for what I understood, very kind introduction from me. So thank you. Before I start, I would like to thank my dear colleague, Professor 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀, for exceptional organization skills and for being so friendly during my visit. And I would like also to mention that Professor Francisco, who is present here with us, Francisco Gurria, in fact, he made first effort and first steps for my visit today, because he has prepared the first program, or Erasmus project, together with Polish professors Ania Śmiałska and Napoleon Wołański. And the first project got very good reviews and allowed us to prepare the next project within the frame of that project. I think Yuri just mentioned that we had several visits, and we will have visit of Natalia soon in Poland, and I came to visit 𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗀. So I'm really very happy to be here again. My memories come back. I see people who were very warm during my first visit. So it's a very big pleasure for me to be here with you and to present. And I would like to remember that when I came first time, okay, like this, yes? Is the switch off? Or is off? It worked earlier when I tried it, but now somehow maybe it's left the presentation. We'll see here. Okay, so we go to the yes. So this is actually my first lecture that I came with. You see some small change in the title. It was Vistula River Valley. And it was for me quite a surprising information when I learned in 𝗀𝗁𝗀𝗀 there are no rivers, no Yucatan. I was not aware of that. So I came with a lecture about rivers to people who have no rhythm. It was quite confusing for me. But in fact, that lecture was about the river valley. And the valleys are of great importance in Europe because they still preserve semi-natural habitats. So when we speak about the river, and I will include part of this presentation in my today's presentation, we really mean the valley, because the valleys have exceptional natural values in Europe and in Poland, because Europe is extremely developed comparing to Yucatan. So coming back to the present title is quite different. I will focus more on the population viability analysis, and we'll try. I know there are still some students among us, so I will also include some basic information about population viability analysis. I come from the University of Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski in Warsaw. This is a campus that is located very near to Warsaw. Sometimes that acronym is presented as a university that is located close to Warsaw. It's making fun of my university. It's one campus. This campus, it's mostly offices, administration, rectors are located in a very unique Bielany Reserve. This is really example of very pristine riparian forest. And the real campus with students is located on 𝗺cie, not far away from the transport hub in Warsaw, 𝗺cie, where you can take metro, bus, train, or even walk to our university. So coming to the lecture now. I recently read some news from 𝗿𝗚𝗀 International, and I especially make bold some sentences that we often read when we try to learn something about nature conservation. Threat, grammar on verbs, biodiversity conservation, risk of extinction, assessments based on models predicting the extent and pattern of deforestation. And this terms critically endangered value rate. So these are very commonly used terms, and they are very much associated with the problem. One of the major problems in conservation of nature today, it's with the loss of biodiversity. And I'm trying I have a lectures about landscape ecology for my students. And I want to always indicate to students that the popular understanding of nature destruction is elimination of habitats. We all realize, yes, some habitats are gone, they are developed, and we focus on destruction, elimination. But parallelly to that process, there is a very strong process of nature fragmentation, of habitat fragmentation. Maybe it's not as hot subject in Yucatan. However, when I was driven last days from Cancun to Campeche, I noticed highway, parallel to the highway, it's Maya train tracks, where the fauna passages. There, I had a good guide, Professor Jerzy, who said, well, there are some under road passages. Okay, they function, but they will not function for large mammals. I'm not sure if jaguars use them, or tapirs. Some of scientists in ecosystem study tapirs. So I have a feeling that fragmentation is also a problem of Yucatan right now. So it's a really very serious problem associated with decreased survival rate of small population. This is kind of metapopulation point of view analysis. But the main project, I always illustrate with one graph to my students. This is a very simple graph. It shows the number of butterfly species. I can use this one. And the habitat area. It's just very small habitats. Look, 100 square meters, 10,000 square meters. The largest is 100,000 square meters. And the number of species that were recorded on each plot. Clearly, there's a regression line, strong regression line that shows that larger habitats carry more number of species. What kind of species? Butterfly species. Only butterfly species? Not. If you take any group of plants or of animals, you will produce the same graphs studying plots of different sizes. And this is very interesting. The question comes, why? What's happening? Is it because we look better when we study large habitats? We record more species? In some degree, maybe yes. But the main problem is that in that group of species, there are some species that will never survive on habitats of this size. So fragmentation of habitats leads to the elimination of species that require large habitat patches. And that's a very strong process. And to say it in Poland, I always think of European lynx. Lynx is a big predatory cat, smaller than jaguar, maybe a little bit bigger than ocelot that lives here. But it requires large areas. Some scientists believe that only 𝗻𝗶𝘀𝗹𝘀 primeval forest on the boundary between Poland and Belarus fulfills ecological needs of European lynx. It's not true, because lynxes have adopted also right now to fragmented situations, but of course they do not prefer that kind of situation. Fragmentation eliminates large predators, specialist species that require special features of habitats. So it is right now the determination of what is the minimum fragment of habitat required for some species. What is the minimum size of population that will allow species to survive, or populations to survive? And here is the citation that to determine the minimum viable populations and the area requirements is a major task of conservation biology. I will come back to the term minimum viable population very soon. Okay, sorry, I combined two presentations. Suddenly, some of these letters are jumping too late. When we think or speak about nature conservation, about the conservation biology, we usually, as biologists, mostly focus on that first goal of conservation biology: assessment and management of biodiversity. That is what I do, basically, during my field work. That is probably what most of you biologists do when they work out in the field or in the laboratory. Some species are so small that we study them rather on the microscope, not in the field. But there is an additional, very important goal: management, nature management. Identifying and implementing solutions to ensure persistence of species. So biologists, field biologists, mostly field biologists, are usually on that associated with the first goal, but we very often need to provide background to the decision makers. So to ones who manage to identify, implement solutions to ensure persistent of conservation of species. And there's a very good expression about conservation biology. Is this a crisis discipline where actions need to be undertaken without complete knowledge? I remember 3 years ago, I started my lecture from saying that we biologists want to know everything about nature. And when we are asked, okay, now I need to construct a road, or build a city or a park, please answer me. What would be the effect on nature? And we biologists usually say, well, okay, it's so complicated. Please give me 3 years. Or maybe I will need 5 years to study everything, to have complete knowledge. There's no time for us to have 5 years to have complete knowledge. So this is really conservation biology is kind of crisis discipline where we will be always, will not feel sure that we know everything, that we understand everything.
Esto indica que en la escuela no sirve hacer acordeones para pasar los exámenes.
And am I using the mic properly or some problem? Okay. And okay, so probably you already had time to read it, but the last sentence it's important. tolerating uncertainty is often necessary in our work as a biologist who present data to decision makers. In fact, since so many species, so many habitats, so many nature touches are threatened with extinction, our major goals would be probably to answer such questions: which species are threatened, what factors drive species to extinctions, and we will be asked to develop strategies to prevent extinction. It means to conserve nature. This I would rather go to this last sentence because that was one of the first examples when population viability model was used and was very impressive and effective in preparing a strategy for conservation of 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗃 ocean turtle. As you know, it's very popular that we all basically we are all for nature. Yes, we will be very happy to engage. I will be very happy to engage to go to the beach and to protect small turtles, maybe to collect them, to give them to specialists who will breed, take care of them until they are big turtles and safe from predators. But I will tell you about this model. It was a very interesting model because it really opened eyes how the proper conservation of turtles should be carried out. So right now, probably I would like to go to the basics and define some terms that I'm using that are very often used in information in press releases. What is population viability? It's simply ability of population to persist and to avoid extinction. And we would say that viable population is a population that would fulfill some criteria. For example, a risk of extinction is not exceeding a certain threshold. Usually we use 1% or 5% in 100 years. So viable population has a very low risk of extinction, somewhere between 1% or 5% in, let's say, 100 years. It's a time scale that I believe we can understand. But million years, yes, 100 years. And the population viability analysis is short, it's PVA. It's the term maybe quite often on my slides. It's just an analysis of probability of population, usually populations or species, to analysis of probability of extinction of the species in some time interval. And usually it leads to analysis of minimum size of population that is able to persist in the time interval. So we come to that idea that is we are not often not aware, but we read for example Red List International IUCN Red List. We always see the criteria. Some for example species are called critically endangered. What does it mean? We understand it's probably some species that will soon disappear, will be extinct. In fact, there's a criteria for it. It's critically endangered species is a species with 50% risk of extinction in 10 years or 3 generations. Why are this additional term 3 generations? Because we not only mean mammals or large birds, but we also maybe we will evaluate some mosquitoes, yes, as in critically endangered. So in such situation, what counts is really generations, not years. And example, very well-known example, panda, which is endangered. It's very famous, but it's not critically endangered. It's endangered. It's famous because it has nice round face. We like round, nice faces. We always feel safe with people who have round faces. And panda is very nice. And species that are endangered, they are in 20% risk of extinction in 20 years or 5 generations. The other example of such species is 𝗀𝗂𝗃𝗃. I will present you one population of analysis specifically dedicated to 𝗀𝗂𝗃𝗃. And usually the scientists who work, who analyze this risk of extinction, they present so-called risk curves that are very easy, yes, to read. They show usually distance in years to the decline, and additionally they show probability of decline. What is important is that modern PVA, population viability analysis models, are all based on stochasticity. They are individually based models. It means that those models give specific features to each single individual in population that they analyze. Those individuals in models that behave independently. Some will die, some will reproduce, some will migrate. And to produce such simple cube, it usually takes about 1,000 runs. And to take average from 1,000 runs to see how this individual in the population, given specific demographic data, how they behave. So curves are very easy to read, and they provide us very easy information to understand. For example, this was something wrong here. I don't know something. Okay, sorry, something. This illustration of a model that analyzes what is the risk of extinction of population. I keep forgetting that I have this. This is population. I don't remember right now which species, but it's model produced by a very famous scientist like 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 in population variability analysis. And in this scenario, the population has no additional animals that enter the population. And you see that it's a risk of decline, so it's high, pretty high here. But if some animals had a chance to enter the population, the risk of extinction is reduced. And for example, many scenarios would analyze how adding a specific number of individuals just to model dispersion will influence the survival rate of the population. So it will always is illustrated with simple graph, but please remember that under the simple illustrations is usually about 500 or 1,000 runs of the model. And that definition of minimum viable population. So minimum viable population is a population that size is necessary for long-term persistence of a population with stochastic, genetic, demographic, and environmental variation, excluding catastrophic events. Catastrophes happen without a knowledge or influence, so these are not included in the definition. And other stochastic variation is included. We can imagine that there is a small population, and suddenly in 1 year, half of males in the population dies. There's some chance of such event, and that's included. The minimum viable population should survive such stochastic events. So minimum viable is the smallest isolated viable population. But I don't know, some of you are students. Did you had a metapopulation theory? Do you know this metapopulation theory? This theory says that some populations don't function as one large population, but they function as a set of small local populations that are connected with movement of animals. And that gives completely different understanding of survival of such populations. And that's why there's also additional, I went too far, to the next slide. Okay, so I go to the next time. This is a metapopulation, minimum viable metapopulation. And number of small local populations that are connected increases the chances of metapopulation to survive. That's basically the idea. Because there is so-called rescue effect. If 2 or 3 local populations are destroyed, there is a rescue effect that the third local population will resubmit individuals to the area to population. And so there is additionally that understanding of minimum viable metapopulation and accordingly minimum amount of suitable habitats in the metapopulation. Sometimes we are focused on minimum viable population, but we should never forget about the capacity of habitat, because it's only large capacity of habitat that enables stochastic variation in number of population. So minimum viable population given small capacity of habitat will not be viable. It will, in some time, it will die. And this is actually the model that was showing it, that was that with the minimum viable population of 240 capercillas. This is kind of big chicken, capercilla, that lives in forest in Europe. It's endangered. I don't think America has a similar species. But to survive, the population of 240 capercillas needs capacity of habitats for 500 animals, because it was the only scenario when the population survived. All scenarios with smaller habitat capacity has shown that a lot of the populations get extra. So I just show this example to illustrate that sometimes that using that minimum viable population is misused, because we need also information about habitat size. Sorry, okay. And bad news in that analysis of population viability is that according to 𝗺ry's, there are very many populations of species that are already in that phase of small, so-called phase of small population, the last phase, where according to this study, many rare and endangered species may already be committed to extinction because they have kind of stepped over the limiting point in the number. They step out of the phase of population decline into phase of small population. Maybe you also have such situation of some animal species in Mexico. For example, in Europe right now, it's a quite well-known example of lapwing. It's a bird, migrating bird that is very common, very well visible and heard in spring. Every spring you see really many lapwings in European landscape, especially farm landscape. But it turned out that many in this case doesn't mean that it's a strong viable population, because when the study has shown that are mostly birds that are too old to effectively reproduce. They don't lay expected number of eggs. The population looks like it's a crowd of lapwings, but most of those lapwings are no longer able to reproduce. And maybe that population has entered that phase of small population and is simply going on the way to extinction. And now I will try to, I think I need to speed up. I will few more words about the population viability analysis. It's not only the process, it's more a kind of toolbox. There are many models, many approaches that are used for population viability analysis. It's a toolbox of methods of extinction risk assessment based on population habitat features, using computer simulations and mostly using the individual approach. There's no single recipe to follow when doing a PVA, but we have a really good selection of models that can be used. One group of such models is called tailor-made PVAs. They were especially popular and common in the early years of population variability analysis. Those were models that were made for specific situations, like for the 𝗀𝗃𝗃 or from specific new species. These are mostly models that are produced by mathematicians or physics who entered the field of biology. Regular biologists are not prepared to construct computer models. So these models are very powerful, but nobody understands them except of the one single creator. That's a limiting factor in using these models. The other models are ready-to-use models, and there's a list of models. Metapopulation model, 𝗺cie vortex, meta-X, large ramas. One is German, one is Dutch, one is Finnish. There are all kinds of models. And there is also a critic of that model, that it's a black box syndrome. You are given the model, you start it on your computer, and it says, enter the number, enter the number, enter the number. Here is your result. But what did I enter? What the model did? Almost nobody can understand. So black box syndrome means that you can use these models without proper understanding and misuse them. And this happens. So PVA are often criticized. It's like some say that using PVA models is like predicting tomorrow's weather. Well, in my opinion, weather predictions get better every year. Right now, when I see weather prediction, I am informed that it's 90% of accuracy. I don't know here, are you giving such information? In Poland, we are given model that 90% accuracy weather prediction. To me, sounds like very good. So if that's also accurate for PVA models, I would be very happy if the models that I use have this 90% accuracy. And there is a way right now to do things better, to improve these PVA models. First of all, we, for example, when applying model, we use this, we use this parameters, verification of parameters that we use for the model. We compare the outputs of model to a real situation. And only after we apply the model to scenarios. And this sensitivity analysis, it's also very, very good way to check your model, because when adapting some factors used for the model, you can observe the result, and your knowledge indicates that there is too much variation that is caused by your small changes of model parameters. Then you get suspicious of the model. The lack of standardization is no longer a problem because there are right now a very strong effort that each model has IBM protocols which indicate exactly what kind of parameters were used and how they were verified. And also models are right now critically compared to each other. So we have also many data from this. And one of the last approaches is to use scenario analysis and to compare only direct results of the model, but rather to use several models and to see do they evaluate different scenarios in the same order. Do they rank scenarios similarly? So these are basically the ways to overcome critics of population variability analysis. Basically, these models can be divided into two groups. One is demographic models, population-based stochastic simulation models. So they are based on very accurate details of demographic data, of data of biology, ecological needs of the species. They are all dynamic models, individually based, and they are, we call it parameters hungry. You will not use this model for a poorly known species, because that model simply would not work. But these models are very good to identify key threats to population of the species analyzed. So they are used for management strategies for active conservation of threatened species, and that's a moment when I want to remind you that model that was used to improve the conservation of loggerhead turtle. So I go to all this because it's, no, I went too far, sorry. Basically, the model has shown that instead of focusing on conservation of turtle eggs and young turtles, what we need to focus on conservation and lowering the mortality of young turtle females that will enter the breeding. And when this approach was used, the situation of loggerhead turtle has increased, because the key factor was mortality of pre-reproducing females, not saving 900 of 10,000 small turtles. This action, which is very romantic, maybe, yes, and very popular, it doesn't have such effect as saving young turtle females that will enter the reproduction. And the other type of models, these are called habitat models. They are also data hungry, but they are easy to fulfill with these models because they are hungry for GIS data, geographic system data, habitats, barriers, vegetation maps, land use maps. So this is basically quite easily available right now. We have a lot of satellite data, GIS data, Google Maps are sometimes also very detailed. And these models usually incorporate the meta-population theory, so they not only analyze demographic data for one population, but they analyze how local populations are connected, what's the dispersion connection between local populations, and they can be provided with expert knowledge parameters. So we can use these models for species that are poorly known. We can use expert knowledge to say that some European lynx would have very similar habitat or dietary, for example, dietary needs as similar species in Asia. These models are more flexible, I would say. So models are focused on the identification of key habitat changes and their influence on future of survival of species. And here, I would like to present you the model that was applied by my colleague, Camilla Franz, who was my PhD student some time ago. And the model was about saving population of the 𝗪𝗪 falcons in Bulgaria. 𝗪𝗪 falcons are still quite common in some parts of Europe, and very rare and even extinct in some other parts. And the idea was that there are so many 𝗪𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃 falcons in some local population that we probably, but we are not sure, probably take some of the young falcons and translocate them to Bulgaria, where 𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗃 falcons are almost extinct. So the model that was used, it was a Ramas-Keys, well, maybe not too much details that you need to know, but just to say you that how specific data were used. Individual were analyzed individuals of different sex and age classes, and sex class specific survival and fecundity rates were analyzed. And in that model, they were created scenarios for donor populations, so for existing populations of 𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗃 falcons, and to study if taking some young falcons from this population will not negatively influence the populations. And the second part was to see how many animals have to be taken from the donor populations to create a viable population in Bulgaria. So the first answer to taking, yes, from the donor population. This is model of population without elimination or translocation of animals to other populations. And at least these two scenarios of taking one or two young falcons every year for up to 4 years. That line indicates moment of removing young animals. So it has shown that okay, safely 1 to young falcons can be taken. And the second analysis was about new population. How many are necessary to create viable population of falcons in Bulgaria? And it came out that basically adding for 4 years up to three young falcons is enough to create this viable population. So all the scenarios showed that taking out from the local populations and providing these falcons to new populations can be synchronized without negative influence on donor populations. And the other one example of scenario analysis for valley of Segre River in Spain. It was analysis that was based on the approach to study how different scenarios of future development of the river valley will influence animals that inhabit different typical habitats in that Spanish valley. This is area of Spain with a very traditional agriculture. It's irrigated basically manually. We saw how it's irrigated, so there are channels that were deep with a shovel in the ground, and there are simply metal plates that are secured in the channel to stop irrigation or taken out to allow water flow. And the local farmers, they basically watch each other that nobody takes that allows to go too much water to his field, because he will take away water from the neighbor. So it's traditional system based on trust of local farmers, and it's a very, very long-lasting tradition of farming in this area. And the area is threatened by tourist development. The area is near to very attractive winter activities, skiing, for example. And the problem of area is that tourists appear only for 2 or 3 months. If you build hotels for tourists, the hotels require water treatment plants, but this water bacteria in this water treatment plant require constant flow of biomaterials, or they die when the tourists are not there. So it's very complicated that urbanization and the development of this area, turning it to some modern tourist attraction, is very demanding. And there is local decision makers. They hope that they will avoid basically this scenario. So the aim was to analyze the effects of two scenarios on biodiversity of this valley, and we included species that are typical for all habitats that are most important habitats in the river valley. Here, as you see, there are different insect, bird, mammal, reptile, as many species as possible to illustrate the diversity of animals in the valley. And we used that large, it's kind of habitat model. What it requires good land cover maps, and it requires some expert knowledge data about animals. What the large does, it classifies the size and viability of local population, and its classification is based mostly on data on habitats. And then it also analyzes how local populations are connected and are they creating a surviving or valuable network of local populations. And it's always presented in large, not only with tables and numbers, but also with colors. The darker the green color, the better. Dark green colors indicate minimum viable populations. Light blue colors indicate key populations. And the assessment of the whole network of populations is that all this metapopulation of given species is viable if it has one minimum viable local populations or one key populations and several small local populations, or all of these local populations create a viable metapopulation. Okay, this is to shortly show you what changes between two scenarios were included. So the one scenario was conservation and maintenance of traditional land use in the river valley, and all this affecting size of habitat is shown here. In brown is show conservation and maintenance, and in red color is shown habitats. Changes of habitat size in scenario of abandonment of agriculture and traditional land use. And the important moment of this scenario was fast growth of urban areas. So urban areas increase in size twice in this scenario. What was the effect on population numbers in this scenario? The conservation scenario leads to higher numbers of species that are associated with riparian habitats. For example, is a strong effect. What's the other effect on population viability? Again, the traditional scenario allows better connectivity of the local populations, and also it allows for better evaluation of viability of this population. You see that in the scenario abandonment of traditional use, this large local population is no longer viable. It's a population that will be extinct. in this scenario of urbanization. Also, 𝗺 has that ability to analyze also how all local populations interact with each other, how are they connected. And again, conservation scenario shows better integration of local populations into the big viable network of populations. When under the urbanization scenario, small local populations are divided and they don't function as a whole network. So from that project, there were some conclusions that were specifically directed to the decision makers in Spain. And this was about implementing the abandonment scenario would result in a negative impact on all investigated species. And the conservation scenario can allow combined conservation of generalist and specialist species. It also shows possibility for a successful combination of nature conservation and infrastructure and urban development. But also, we had made conclusion about use of that habitat large models, that it's suitable to predict species distributions and the consequences of the landscape changes without having exact good data on each species. And it's very easy to adopt to new areas and large study areas. And in fact, it was that at the second use of that large model that we have conducted together with the Dutch team, because the first time we were introduced to the model, it was in Poland. It was I provided in my first lecture 3 years ago. I gave you more details on that analysis of Vistula River developments. Are there any questions at this moment? Should I interrupt? Maybe come back to some details? Because to go back? Okay. Back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Try to see this slide. When you compare two scenarios, conservations, abandonment, which is the meaning of
the graphs?
Yeah.
Okay. So how to analyze scenarios? In these models, you need to express scenarios as a digital maps. On maps, you have to show distribution and size of each habitat, how it is modified by scenario. And this was simply the easiest way to show how rivers without riparian forest, what area do they have in each scenario. So in the abandonment of traditional land use, there is increase of sections of rivers without riparian forest, and they're comparing to riparian forest increases in conservation and maintenance of traditional land use, and decreases in abandonment or development scenarios. So this is simply to show how scenarios are reflected in habitat areas in the model, because basically that's an interesting moment in modeling scenarios, that you cannot tell computer. You need to give it data on your scenarios. If your scenario is to build the town, you need to make the town on digital map. if you say that you want to conserve hay meadows, you need to show all the meadows that you want to conserve, or meadows that you will lose because you will build a town there. So before analysis, you end up with two sets of maps. One map that exactly corresponds to formulation of scenario, and the other one that corresponds to the other scenario. Okay. So here it was shown how habitats are modified within each scenario, and later I show what's the effects on number of species and the population viability and surviving of different species associated with the groups. Okay, so my next was about scenario evaluation of distillate river scenarios, and I just will go through it very fast because I already presented it to you. Maybe some of you didn't know that section. I would only say that Vistula Valley is very important in Poland. It's kind of a key river with very high nature values and high biodiversity, and of course there are conflicting issues. Like in all Europe, there are conflicting issues of flood protection and nature protection. And it's also very hot discussion in Poland. I remember I had many questions about how we activated stakeholders and how we constructed scenarios for that river. So I will give you basically this information today, because well, we used all hypothetical expected developments that were proposed in that time in Poland. So we invited actually about 70 experts and nature people and so-called stakeholders to build these scenarios, to write them. And after these 5 scenarios were created in the discussions, one is about, again, maximum river regulation. Second one is about basically keeping river as it is. Third one, brave vision of nature. It's very interesting. I will show you maybe in details on the next slide. But the most important part was that we were open at the moment of creating scenarios to people with very different view on future of the Vistula River. We invited NGOs who are fighting to keep that valley without any development. We also invited people who want to develop because they plan to build roads, local roads, or they need ministry that plans to build a new dam, and shown here like and we allow them to work in 5 groups. And this is, for example, effect of work of those people who want very modern development of the central Poland, including river valley. They indicated where they wanted a new dam for electricity production. They have shown it's not well visible. They have shown us all local roads that they want. After building the scenarios, we have prepared again big digital maps with all these elements of scenario. And I would only say about this scenario, which is, we call it brave vision of nature protection. And it was scenario that was inspired by our Dutch partners, because as we were told in the Netherlands, they were not able to protect the nature. But now they are excellent in making nature. It was quite a shock for us in Poland, because when we speak of nature, we usually mean some real nature, like your reserves here in Yucatan, or our national parks. That's what we call nature. And Dutch people, they call nature, for example, artificial pond that is built for frogs. They call it nature. We are not used to it. But in this scenario, they propose that we eliminate dikes along the river, and that we allow the river to flow even in the places that are occupied, where they're inhabited by people now. So it's an unrealistic scenario, but we make it very realistic on maps, and we analyze that all these scenarios, again, using eco-profiles. It means species that are typical for habitats that are important for Vistula Valley. And, for example, these were species that were representative for forest habitats, starting with a very small one, evolved, and ending with the second largest mammal in Poland, elk. Only European bison is bigger. Some other species that were used in this model, and for each species that for each species we provided information about density, dispersion within home range, dispersion outside home range, about barriers for that species, and we named all the habitats that the species inhabits, to make it short. So what is important again is that verification of the model, and we did this 100 rounds. Sorry, I don't know why, but some information is disappearing on slides. We did 100 rounds of modeling, verifying to compare outputs of the model to the real situations that we know in the valley. And we came again to some results that we were able to indicate what's the expected population size of different species associated with different habitats in the valley. And in addition, we were able to show what is the viability of future of the populations of individual species associated, this eco-profile species associated with forests, with meadows, with riparian habitat. And in all this analysis had shown that that scenario of strong development of the valley, including the development of roads and so on, it results in very strong impact on viability of population. And the impact on viability of populations was much stronger than impact on numbers of population. Numbers were kind of, the effect of numbers was feeding the effect on viability, because viability included the problem of fragmentation of habitats. Okay, so all this allowed us to basically to criticize strongly that maximum development of the valley, because it had a negative impact on almost all species analyzed. And I would also like to indicate that that approach is very appropriate to future planning of passages, fauna passages. For example, this situation, the model identified the situation that there is a one key population in this area of the newt. But it's the only key population, and there is a highway, and there are no passages here. So it immediately tells us that if we want other local populations of the newt to survive in Vistula Valley, we need to build a passage, fauna passage for it, and that's the best area to build a fauna passage. So I would suggest, I think I need to come to conclusions. I would suggest that that type of models is considered for when planning also transport, for example, highways on Yucatan to analyze where are the key viable populations, local populations, and to direct and create fauna passages in this area. Thank you very much for attention. I had some more slides, but I think I stop here with the conclusion. Thank you.
Very much for your talk, Professor. I have a question that is a little bit outside the talk. In Europe recently, there has been an increase in a movement, both academic movement and activist movement, pushing three concepts on the conservation of biodiversity. This is a rewilding movement, the new restoration movement that pushes, for example, a much more aggressive approach to invasive species moving from control to eradication. Of course, we know that this is unfortunately impossible for many invasive species in Europe that is possible to eradicate. They're pushing that in general, the conservation movement area. And also a new train of thought, basically pushing the wilding, new restoration, and moving away from theoretical models conservation and a much more aggressive, hands-in approach. What is your thought about this? For example, I just like to mention they are basically basing, they're pushing the idea, for example, that wolves are recolonizing Germany through rewilding. Lynx are recognizing Switzerland, Austria, Germany through rewilding, and also many of the most aggressive approaches on invasive species are basically those that are trying to eradicate rather than control. So, like these are many other examples, like wolves or elk, that you call it in Europe, organized in Austria. How do you think about this?
I don't know. I would rather answer express my private, not more private view. Well, I have shown you examples of just how to anticipate the effects of development. But you mean some idea of more general idea of conservation, where to put effort. In my opinion, probably that approach rewilding is the closest to my understanding of the need to conserve nature. I would direct finances into restoring habitat. This is my opinion. I don't see a need. I am usually against spending money on conservation of specific species, like expensive removals of predators. So quite common approach, or extensive movement of animals. I believe to approach restore habitats, wildlife will return on its own. We have several examples of that kind of approach is successful. Under one condition, that we conserve or recreate ecological corridors. So conserving protection of connectivity of habitats, I believe is very critical, especially in Europe. Yes, especially in Europe.
¿Alguien más?
Thank you so much for the talk. It's very interesting. My question is again a little out of the topic because in fact I work with that I work with it's very interesting, not this part. But my question is, when you have this model, for example, how is the interaction in your country? You finish and you have the talk for example, all the stockholders, the politicians are really interested in this kind of studies. What is the interaction? For example, because unfortunately in our country, we have a lot of studies about this, but it's a little difficult, this interaction, no? And yeah,
Okay. I would say that my experience is disappointing. We were very, I believe we were very energized while working on scenario. We expected that we will not be able to get people with such different approaches that to conserve, to float, to remove dikes and construct dikes in one room. But we managed to bring them all. Well, we gave them separate tables and they worked in groups. And it was the moment when we thought, okay, it works. We had nice activity. We got fighting with each other. It was kind of constructive moment. But okay, then after 3 years, we had this ready project output. We printed nice booklets. We took them to ministries, to local administrative unions, and we expected some reaction, and we had no reaction. So unfortunately, it was kind of interesting. We learned a lot. I believe we learned a lot because my students right now use the models and they're very active in some also NGOs. But no, government did not. Decision makers actually did not. They put it up books somewhere on shelves or in their desks. But you know what happens in ministry? Desk stays, but people change, and every new person cleans the desk. So to be honest, no, disappointed. But on the other hand, you never know. Maybe it's somebody's minds. There is that idea. Yes, maybe it influenced some people, but we simply still don't know that it did.
Another question? Perhaps these models are obviously different for each species, but do you know any particular model that fits better the plant species?
Plants?
Because plants do not move. So but most of these is based in movement.
I think well, I was on some conferences. I'm not a plant specialist, but I listened to many presentations about models of plants, and I believe that these models are mostly about succession of plants, how the succession, how plants interact with each other. What happened to the forest after 1 year? That is, I know such models that analyze how amount of sunlight is limited to smaller plants by larger plants, things like this. These are very interesting models, but I don't see practical. I haven't seen practical meaning of this models. This were more about restoring the natural plant success. I never heard of models that will analyze other aspects of forest.
Yes. You mentioned all the realization of of taking care of some individual females that are highly reproductive, but plants obviously.
Yes, no. Plants in this model, plants are considered a habitat, and you give this habitat a specific value, and that's it.
Yeah.
Google should know about fragmentation, policy, plant fragmentation. Then, you speak English. Cadenas of salmon that used to generate, study models of habitat of fragmentation between forest fragmentation and its integration. And I think we will look at that. Tú trabajaste en fermentación de agave, todo que fosfos con Susana, sí, por haber si trabajamos en diferentes etapas. Anyway, it's a pity they're not here because they would really love to talk.
Okay, we have one question from the internet. Cicero asked, is it possible to use this type of model to predict the impact of crop management practices like conventional versus organic, or the persistence and the diversity of beneficial insects? Not for, let's say, not for natural landscape, but
I
for the impact of management.
I can imagine that it's possible to prepare two scenarios in which you present different activities, but I don't know if critical would be the knowledge about how the insect react to different biological or chemical control. I don't know. To me, it sounds like that could be the critical point in the moment. Not building the scenarios, not preparing the scenarios, but how to describe using some model parameters how to describe the interaction of insects. Here I can. That's my feeling that could be the critical moment in the model.
Okay. Also, the 𝗍𝗁𝗀𝗀 send you hi from Santiago, 𝗍𝗁𝗀𝗀𝗀, Puebla, another state. And there are all the comments in Facebook. James, there is any question?
No,
The chat.
Any questions for the chat?
No? No question? Oh, no question here? Okay. Well, let's take thanks again to Dr. Here, and thank you very much for the people that follow this conference by Facebook and by our social networks. Thank you very much, and see you again in the next presentation. Let me call Natalia Labrina. Let me. This recognition because of the presentation made.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have heard like that.
Okay.
You're doing green and I'm in white.
It is.
That's very nice process.
It doesn't,
Maybe I keep it in one.
Okay.
Okay.